Okay, we are now live on YouTube. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Hila Oz. She is very, very proud to be Jewish. That's her talk tonight. Hila Oz is a recent UCLA graduate who is known for making content about Judaism, anti-Semitism, and Israel. She went on Aliyah to Israel last August and has been learning at seminary since. She now works as a content creator and educator and super passionate about empowering Jews to be proud of their Judaism. Now, I must warn you, she does speak very fast, so pay attention. And she loves questions, so please just listen to her carefully. You can ask her questions through the chat or through the electronic raise hand. So over to you, Hila.
Hi. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Hila Oz. It's very nice to be speaking to you tonight. Just kind of, I guess I'm going to kind of get into my story, how I got into doing what I'm doing, what made me the person I am today. So I was born and raised in a very small suburb, not a small suburb, but a very non-Jewish suburb of Los Angeles called Santa Clarita. My dad is Israeli. My mom was born in America to Israeli parents. So I'm like first and a half generation born in America. And being Jewish was always a really big part. We were very, very traditional. We went to Chabad. Even though we identified more as conservative, my dad had a lot of like feelings about, because he was Israeli, he wasn't used to anything other than, you know, a traditional, you know, Orthodox synagogue with the mechitza and everything like that. So I did Hebrew school there until I was bat mitzvah age. And yeah, I grew up going to public school, surrounded by a lot of non-Jews. And from a very young age, I knew that being Jewish made me different. I remember being really little and thinking that 50% of the world's population was Jewish and 50% was Christian. I didn't know that other people existed, and I didn't know how tiny of a people were, because Judaism was so for a bunch of things, but being Jewish didn't really help me much. I remember being in first grade, being, you know, harassed in the bathroom about being Jewish by other first graders who, you know, obviously were learning some of the stuff from their parents, unfortunately. And in about middle school, I decided that I was just kind of ashamed of who I was. I never really had a strong community, even though I had like a really strong like that, and would always come to Israel during, you know, whatever break. I just never had like a real good foundation in why it's important to be Jewish. Why it's Jewish. I was very obnoxious about that. I wanted to distance myself from my heritage because it made me different. It made me weird, and I didn't understand it. And I wasn't in a place where people were, you know, giving me answers to the questions that I had. And I maybe didn't even feel so comfortable asking those questions. So at the time I was also going to USY, which is the conservative youth group, Camp Ramah, which is a conservative summer camp. And I loved hanging out with people, but I just didn't know so much about the whole God thing. And it wasn't until 2014, that summer was my last summer at Camp Ramah, when I was able to kind of open up to coming back to Judaism. I had a really incredible Rosh Yeshiva, who his name was Alex Jefferson, and he kind of helped guide us towards asking the questions that maybe we never felt comfortable asking. He would always tell us, you know, Yisrael means to grapple with God. He would say, if you don't believe in God, then the God you're thinking of doesn't exist. And he would always open it up to these discussions so we could kind of get more comfortable of breaking out of this Hebrew school, you know, God's in the clouds and he's throwing thunderbolts at you to what God really is. That summer, as some of you may remember, was also a summer of real conflict in Israel. And I remember they kept us very, very like well posted on what was going on here. With the three boys, it was actually just the anniversary of their kidnapping just passed. They were kidnapped and murdered by terrorists. We were kind of going through the whole news story. You know, they told us when it happened. And I remember we were sitting around a campfire in the middle of the night, and they told us, you know, that they had, unfortunately, their bodies had been found. And that summer was a real turning point for me, in not only in the fact that I was no longer an atheist, but it was a turning point. And now I refuse to kind of be afraid of my Jewish identity and be ashamed of it. So I came back to my secular high school, and I was a lot more spiritual and a lot less religious. So like I kind of threw every single law at the door, and I was just trying to find like, what is God and what does God want from me? And unfortunately, I dealt with anti-Semitism. You know, it wasn't just in first grade, it was also a lot in high school. I was just coming from a new point where I refused to kind of back down from it. I remember, you know, people would make Holocaust jokes. Someone keyed a swastika on the side of my car. And it was just, there was one point where I had a really close friend who we got in a huge argument. And the next week she was on another girl's Snapchat story with the swastika drawn on her leg. And I remember just like having that conversation, like asking her, what are you doing? Why did you think that was okay? And her just kind of avoiding taking blame for it. Oh, someone else drew it on me. Like, it's not a big deal. You're making, you know, a bigger deal out of this than it really is. Thankfully, actually about a year ago, she reached out to me to apologize, which was incredibly mature of her. And we hadn't spoken in years, and she just kind of sought me out. But I was still finding my footing in what Judaism meant to me. I didn't really understand so much its relevance, and I guess Torah was kind of my big question. Like, what does this mean, and why am I applying this to my life? Like, why do I not eat pork, but I don't care if something has a hechsher on it? Like, where's the balance in that? So I ended up graduating from high school. I got into my dream college straight out of high school, but I could not afford it. NYU is, I think, like $77,000 a year if you're out of state. So I decided to go to community college. I was able to go for only a year and then transfer as a junior. And thank God I got into UCLA. And I kind of like look back on that whole, you know, it was very depressing for me to get into NYU. Not only that, get into the school at NYU that I had applied to go to. I got a theater degree, so I applied to Tisch. I got into Tisch, and not only that, I got into the Tisch acting school is split up into 6 different studios, and I got into the studio that I had wanted. And you can't even recommend a studio. You don't get to put down what studio you wanted. And it was just heartbreaking that I couldn't, you know, go there. But I look back at it now, and I was like, wow, Hashem like had such mercy on me that I would be pushed in the way of UCLA, which ultimately brought me to where I am today. So I did my year at community college, and then I transferred into UCLA, and I started getting involved with a club on campus called JAM, Jewish Awareness Movement, because a friend from USY had told me about it. Honestly, if he didn't, I would have just like stuck around Hillel or something like that, or Chabad, because that's what I had known. I had never heard of JAM. And there I met Rabbi Naftali Hanfling, who told, we like did coffee meetings and stuff like that. And he told me that there was a Poland trip. And so on my dad's side, they're Yerushalmi and Syrian and like very Sephardi. And I was always very connected to that side of my family because my mom, her parents aren't around. They passed away. So I was never really in touch with my mom's side, which is Polish. Family to me was always Israeli. So I was super, super interested in going to Poland. I ended up going during the winter break of my first year at UCLA, which was my junior year. And it was like, so I spent my 19th birthday in a gas chamber, which was like really weird. And I just remember like going into Auschwitz, and I would like lose my senses. Like I would stop hearing and I'd stop seeing. And it was just so incredibly intense. I remember walking under the Arbeit macht frei sign, and like immediate, like I wasn't crying, but tears just, as soon as I walked past, tears just started falling. And it felt a little like, I felt a little bit possessed when I was in there. Like you could feel death. And I don't know how else to explain that. We went to a few different camps. We went to Treblinka, which is just a monument now, Majdanek, which is where we went on my birthday, which still has the gas chambers because the Russians invaded before they could destroy any of it. And just kind of seeing how people were interacting with the camps was incredibly frustrating. Like Majdanek is completely preserved. It's like frozen in time. And there's a city, and these people's windows of their homes are just looking out into a concentration camp. And I remember when you go to Auschwitz, they charge you to go to the bathroom. And I wanted to scream because I know that there's a cattle car from Lodz, which is where my family is from. There's a cattle car that goes straight from Lodz to Auschwitz. So it's very likely that my family was in that camp. I really don't know. I wanted to scream that, like, didn't my family pay enough for me to like pee here? And there was just so much going on and I couldn't explain it. And I remember I saw a girl who's raised in like a modern Orthodox family, like stop believing in God on the trip. She fully like broke down and she was just like, God can't be real. And I remember looking at her in that moment and being like, if God can do such destruction, it means that in the same measurement he can create, in the same measurement there can be good. And I have to believe that. I have to hold on to that. And I remember, coming back from it right before, there was a non-Jewish guy who we were kind of talking to each other, and it was like, would it be the end of the world? And I was talking to some like Hillel staff member, like, what if I dated a non-Jew? Like, would it be so bad? And he was like, well, you never know, because it's Hillel. And I remember coming back from that trip and being like, it would be the end of the world if even though my children obviously are going to be Jewish, it would be the end of the world. And I remember coming back also thinking, this is like the most Los Angeles thing I ever say, but my sister and I always dreamed of getting matching nose jobs because that's how it is in Los Angeles. And that's, those are the pressures that are put onto us. And I remember coming back and just thinking like, why would I want to make my features more like the people who tried to kill me? And I don't know, it's like a silly thing, but I really took that away from Poland, was I don't want to get a nose job anymore. And that just completely like left like all of a sudden. And so I came back, and then I kind of lost, what I'd gained in Poland. First, for the first few weeks back, I was dealing with like intense trauma from the trip. I wasn't doing well in school, and I finally, got back into my rhythm, and I kind of forgot everything I learned. And, it was just like, oh, like whatever, it happened. It was a trip, it was good that I went on it. It was educational. And, I kind of, whatever, summer came around. At the beginning of summer break, my sister and I decided to go on Birthright together through UCLA. And I absolutely hated it. A lot of people talk about Birthright as like this really awesome experience. And I don't know if it was because I've been to Israel so many times. I don't know if it was because I just chose the wrong trip for me. It just was not right for me at all. And I left feeling extremely unfulfilled. I remember we spent like 45 minutes talking about the Dome of the Rock, which if you've seen any of my social media, I don't like the Dome of the Rock, and I talk about how much I don't like it a lot. And we didn't talk at all about how it was a colonial project, how it was made specifically to prevent Jews from building on top of rebuilding their holiest site, how it was made to mock Jews. It was made as an act of anti-Semitism. We didn't talk about that. We just talked about, oh, this is a building and it's pretty. And then we only had 20 minutes to pray at the hotel, and I was just like angry. And I remember I was at the wall and I was just like, I'm angry, God, and I don't know what to do because I want to talk to you, but I can't. And I just right after my sister and I went to Berlin, and then we got to see the anti-Semitism there, and it kind of felt like Poland part two. And I was just frustrated when I came home. I kept telling my mom, I was like, I need to be back in Israel. Like, I need to do it over, because I've never left Israel feeling so unfulfilled. I've never left and felt like I just didn't do it. I didn't do Israel. And she was like, you know what? Like, maybe next summer you'll find a trip. It'll all be okay. And at the time I was I don't know, have any of you read or seen the movie Exodus by Leon Uris? The movie has Paul Newman in it. Okay, so Ari Ben Kanan, the main character of Exodus by Leon Uris, is based off of my great grandfather Yehuda Arazi. Leon Uris interviewed him to create the character, he was a commander in Mossad Aliyah. He did the whole hunger strike thing on the boat. It's called the La Spezia Affair. You should look it up. So at that time, like right after I came home, I started reading Exodus for the first time. Because, from Poland, I was still like learning about my family. And it's just, I had like this huge like Zionist kick, and I was like, I have to join the army, and I have to go back to Israel, and I don't know what I'm doing here, and I just need to go home. And I was working for my mom at the time. She's a lawyer, so I was working as her law clerk, and I was just like every drive home, and she works like an hour away, so it's an hour there and an hour back, and I would just talk the whole ride there and the whole ride back about how I needed to get back to Israel. So 2.5 weeks after I land from my Birthright Germany trip, Rabbi Naftali Handfling from JAM posts on Facebook, who wants to go to Israel for $299? And I was sitting on the couch in our living room, and I'm like, Ima, if there was hypothetically a trip to Israel for $300, would you let me go? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, so there's a trip to Israel for $300. And so I messaged him. He told me to come over for Shabbat dinner and talk a little bit more about it. At the time, I was in the middle of 2 film jobs. One film I was in as an actor. The other, I was like a set dresser. And the one I was in as an actor was having its premiere right that Friday night. So I drove from the premiere to my rabbi's house, because I was still driving on Shabbat. And they really like screwed me over in the production. I was just so angry. I was in such a mood. And I come over to his house. I'm not even eating. I'm not even listening to what he says. I was just like, I don't care. And I said these words to him. I said, I don't care if you put me in a box and punch a couple holes in it. Like, as long as I'm in Israel, I'm okay. And he made sure to bring that up every time I was in quarantine here. So, he told me about this thing called the Akiva trip. I don't know if any of you know Rabbi Ben-Zion Klatzko. He's like the creator of Shabbat.com, very big rabbi, one of the holiest people I've ever met in my entire life, who I had no idea who he was at the time. So he runs this trip called the Akiva trip. You come to Israel for 2.5 weeks. It's basically like Birthright, except you learn at Aisha Torah in the mornings, and then you tour in the afternoons. And he was like, it's like Birthright, but deeper. And then he also told me about this thing called Neve, which is a seminary. And I was like, I don't know what that word means, but like, I don't care. Just get me back to Israel. So he says, okay, but the Akiva trip leaves a week from Sunday. So basically, within that week, I had called Rabbi Klatzko over the phone, met him over the phone. He offered to pay for all my time at seminary. So within a week and a half, I had seen a Facebook post and then was at Newark Airport on the way to Israel for 6 weeks. And it happened very, very fast. And I remember when I was in the airport, I was like, what if I decided to try Shomer Negia on this trip? Because I'd been reading about it. If you don't know what that is, it's basically you don't touch people of the opposite sex. It is definitely not something you start with, but I'm crazy. So I started with it. And I was just like, it's 2.5 weeks. Like, let me just try to like not touch boys and see how it goes. Because I'd been arguing with my rabbis about it for a while now. Mind you, I'm not keeping anything. I don't keep kosher. I don't keep Shabbat. I don't dress modestly, whatever. So I decided at Newark Airport that I was going to try Shomer Negia. I think within 2 days of the trip, I knew that I was going to be religious. I never in my life intended on being any sort of Orthodox, any sort of anything. I was kind of happy being like, the whole God exists and Judaism's right, but like, I don't have to connect the dots here. And I kept my first Shabbat. That first Shabbat, it was in Sfat, and I've been keeping Shabbat, thank God, ever since. From that point on, I kept kosher, and from that point on, I have basically, with a couple exceptions, kept Shomer Negia. And then after this incredible 2.5-week experience where we're learning all day and we're seeing Israel, and I'm with people who actually care, not just people who want to like party in Tel Aviv and want a free vacation. I'm sent to Neve Yerushalayim, which is an incredible seminary for a whole month. And I'm just there being taught all these Bible stories and being taught, Jewish law and how to, I had a meeting with a rabbi, and he knew I was going to live in a sorority house and teaching me how to like be kosher in a non-kosher kitchen. And I was just so, it happened so fast, but it was such a huge change. And I came back to California the day before I started my senior year. And I remember, showing up and just telling half of my class that I wouldn't touch them anymore, which, if you know theater people, it's like very weird. And thank God, I had its struggles. I struggled with keeping kosher because there wasn't, accessible kosher food. But it all worked out. I was able to do it. And my fall quarter of my senior year, I got the lead in the fall play, which is like a huge deal. And there was a whole story of the director. Basically what had happened was I knew that I was going to have to like come in on Shabbat. That was part of the rehearsal schedule. So Friday night, I'm like crying. It's my first Shabbat, since I've been cast, and it's my first Shabbat since I started keeping Shabbat, where I'm not going to like go to a Shabbat dinner. And I was just like, I'm sorry, God. And I like made Kiddush on my own. It was really sad. And the whole walk there, basically at that point, I had only taken on, not using my phone on Shabbat. But the whole walk there, I was like, should I write or should I not write? Because the first week it's just taking notes and you have to sign in, and it's a whole thing. And I didn't make up my mind till I walked in the room, and then I turned to the stage manager and I said, can you sign me in? I can't write today. And the director was like, did you just say you can't write? And I said, yeah, it's Shabbat. And she said, oh, she was Jewish, but she was secular. The next week, she sits us all in a circle before rehearsal, and she says, I'm thinking of changing the schedule so Friday nights are off, so you don't have a rehearsal on Friday night. And so I raised my hand. I'm like, I would really like that because I want to go to Shabbat dinner. And every single other person after me says, I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. And so I'm just preparing in my head. I'm like, okay, it was fun while it lasted, while the idea lasted, but this definitely isn't going to happen because I'm the only person who wants it. And then it finally got back to the director, and she was like, you know what? Hila's already giving so much to be here, so I'm going to do it anyway. And it was just kind of like this whole moment of, there's this saying that, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. So it was the fact that I decided in that moment I was going to take that step further to keep Shabbat. It made it so that I could keep more Shabbat. It was just really, it's such an incredible time in that show. And everyone was very, very supportive. And then, but on top of that, I was having struggles with my sorority house because I was paying a lot of money for food that I could not eat. We had a private chef, and I was food insecure. I was having some health issues because I wasn't eating. And basically, I was like fighting to get out of my sorority housing contract. And they just wouldn't let me out. So I wanted to move into a different apartment with another girl who kept kosher, and it just wasn't happening. And I remember over winter break, I was able to come back to Neve for 2.5 weeks, basically just be there for Hanukkah. And I remember the 8th night of Hanukkah in Hasidic thought is like it's one of the most important nights for prayer. It's like it's the closing of all the Chagim. It still has all the Kedusha of like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and all that. And it's kind of like the final day of repentance. And I remember sitting in front of the Chanukiah on the 8th night of Hanukkah. And I cried 2 hours after lighting, and I just so that move forward in my search for all my meals, because that's what I was doing the past quarter. And I got back and none of my prayers were answered, or something that I had asked for just fell in line. And I was like, oh my gosh, you did get me out of the contract, because then I'd be paying for housing. It made sense. And so finally, so that's like the whole backstory, I guess. And then finally we get to Corona era starting. And I am bored at home and my classes are online. It's because you're
Hila, but we're getting a lot of
doing
interference.
like a little bit of performance, and we'll talk a little bit, sorry,
No, we're getting a bit of, you're cracking up.
can you hear me now?
No, it's no.
I think if we try again, it should be fine.
Yeah, because you're frozen as well.
No, not now. She isn't.
Oh,
Back on. All right, carry on. We'll let you know if we have a problem.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, go on. Oh, you're now frozen.
Oh, okay.
okay. Sorry.
Oh,
I'm frozen again.
No, you're back.
Hello.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. So basically, I started seeing on platforms like TikTok a lot of people speaking about the conflict and just saying stuff that was blatantly wrong. And I'm a very fiery personality. I've always been very stubborn and obnoxious. So I started making my own videos.
Hila, are you using
I really
laptop?
thought that no one, this is what I believe in. Yes.
Do you have a phone there as well? Because if you
let me try and log in.
No, I was going to say, if you turn the Wi-Fi off on your phone, that should improve the output.
There's no Wi-Fi on my phone.
Oh.
I only have Wi-Fi on my laptop.
Oh, I see. Okay, carry on. You seem okay now.
Wait. How about this? How about now?
Yep, that's okay.
Okay. So basically I started making videos on TikTok, not thinking anything of it. I didn't think anyone would ever care about what I had to say. But they started getting a lot of traction. They started getting a lot of interaction. People on the other side started making videos about how terrible I was. And there wasn't really, there weren't really creators talking about the conflict this time, a year and a couple months ago. It was very, very new. Now there are a whole bunch of creators who are making videos specifically about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but this was really like uncharted territory at the time. And thank God through that, I started making a lot of friends who were also kind of starting to make videos about that. And these are some of my closest friends. I text them every day except for Shabbat. And through that, I got involved with what's called Jewish on Campus, which started a little over a year ago, I think. I think it's been about a year, which is an organization started by college students to promote education about anti-Semitism that happens on college campuses. So I work with them in social media. I, thank God, started working with Aisha Torah, which to me was like mind-blowing. I just, right before I got on here, I posted another TikTok for them. So that's more of a Kiravi type job. I do a lot in like Jewish education. I started working with JTV on YouTube, where basically I'm hired to make videos for my segment called Hot Take with Hila, which is a lot of, my takes on the conflict, on anti-Semitism, on anti-Zionism. And I remember a really big turning point for me last year was I had just turned on my phone after Shabbat and I saw a message from my sister being like, congrats. And she showed me that Rudy Rockman, I don't know if you know who he is, he's like a huge Israel activist, who I'd been following for years, before I had done anything. I used to watch his videos and be like, whoa, this guy's so cool. Like, I could never do that. But he had posted one of my videos from TikTok on his Instagram, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I reached out to him. I'm like, wait, this is so cool. Thank you so much. And we started talking. I now work with him for Habayit, which is the organization he's involved with that brings Israelis and Palestinians together to reach coexistence, to talk about, you know, our shared love of the land, and to hopefully like bring peace through us collaborating together. And I just brought him to speak. I'm currently working as a madracha for a J internships program. And I brought him to speak to my students. And yeah, from there, I just started getting all of these incredible opportunities. I got to speak with Hila Fold, who's an incredible person. I started working through this thing called Nitzavim Educators, and I was sent out to gap year programs to talk about the conflict, to talk about social media and how to utilize it for the conflict, and for education. Basically, you know, a lot of people ask me, do you think you're, you know, what do you think you're doing? What do you think, what impact do you think you have? And I really think the biggest part of my impact is I have, thank God, helped other Jews feel like they can fight against anti-Semitism, like they don't have to hide who they are. I feel that I've been able to empower people to speak up. And, you know, thank God, even a lot of the TikTokers who are really into the IP conflict now, they tell me, you know, the reason I started it was because I saw your videos and you made me feel like I could do it and you inspired me to do it. And I think that, you know, the Torah says, you know, when we keep mitzvot, when we're proud to be Jewish, and when we're keeping to being Jews, we're going to be fine. We're going to live in our land. We're going to have food. It's going to be great. There's going to be rain in the right time and sunshine in the right time, and it's all going to be amazing. But when we assimilate, when we forget who we are, that's when we're going to be kicked out of our land. That's when people are going to pursue us. That's when we're going to have to deal with anti-Semitism. And really, if you look at the history of the world, every exiled peoples loses their identity. There is no such thing as people being exiled from their land and continuing their culture. They are absorbed into other cultures. And that's why we don't have all of these ancient empires who are huge. We don't have people who, you know, practice those practices anymore. Only the Jews have maintained their identity in exile. And for 2,000 years, it's unthinkable. And the only reason we were able to do that was because of anti-Semitism. Because even if we, you know, unfortunately sometimes want to be like the nations, want to be like the Gentiles, they will never forget that we are not them. Even if we forget that we are special, they never forget that we're special. And they want to constantly remind us. And they, I was at this beautiful Havdalah with the Atiases, who are this beautiful family in Jerusalem. And Rabbi Atias was talking about how the Goyim cannot stand it when we are not proud of ourselves. And they cannot stand it, you know, when we're not secure in our identity and secure in our ownership of this land and our connection to Hashem. You know, when we say, well, I don't know, like if Jews are indigenous, like obviously they're going to be like, well, then what connection do you have to this land? You should leave. It's only when we say, this is our land, we are indigenous, we fought for it, we were given it, all of these things. It's only when we are so secure in who we are and what we are supposed to have that they kind of back off, and then we can live in peace with them, and then we can do our actual purpose in this world rather than just trying to survive. So I definitely had a long journey of accepting, you know, why it's so important to be Jewish and why it's so important to keep Torah mitzvot, and what it really means to be secure in my Judaism and proud to be Jewish. because it's not just, wearing a giant Magen David and, eating a latke. It's, keeping Shabbat, it's keeping kosher, it's keeping laws that sometimes aren't, so exciting to keep, I've definitely struggled with some of the laws, but in that it's my recognition that everything that I have comes from Hashem. And that's the most important thing to remember, because we ourselves do not have any strength. Our strength is only what comes from Hashem. So when I decide, okay, I'm gonna, take time off on Shabbat, or I'm gonna dress more modestly, or whatever it is, it's me saying, Hashem, I know that my success does not come from me, it only comes from you, and therefore I can actually have success. So yeah, I don't know. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You were an actress in LA, I believe.
Yes.
And you went from becoming as an actress to Baal Teshuva, which is a big jump, wasn't it? But how did you, because I know you came from an unorthodox family, how did they take it?
They're very, I have heard like horror stories with Balei Tshuva of, their families won't talk to them. They're, so ashamed. They won't do this. My family was so supportive. And yeah, there's like a bit of a culture gap, they don't sometimes understand why I'm so strict with some things and why I'm, why this, particular chumrah, how do I translate that? Stringency am I taking on? Yeah. But I remember when I came home from that original 6-week period that in Israel that made me Baal Tshuva, I had been talking to my mom the whole time about the whole thing. And I came home and there was just like a giant box of like brand new pots and pans for me to have my own pots and pans so they would be kosher. My parents are coming, Mirza Hashem, next month to visit me. I saw my mom like a month ago, but I haven't seen my dad in about 10 months, which has been very difficult. I'm very, very close with my parents. I'm very close to my family. And even though it's difficult because we do live different lives, and I'm sure it's like weird to see your child going down a completely different path than you did. I always tell them, the reason I'm religious is because of how you raised me. You raised me with good morals and you raised me to love Judaism, and you put me in the direction that I'm going. And they have been really, I'm so blessed to have such supportive parents. Thank God.
And what about your siblings? You've got siblings, haven't you?
Yeah. I have a little brother and an older sister. My little brother's very quiet. He's just an angel. He like doesn't complain about anything. He's such a sweetheart. So he's just like, whatever, nothing phases him really. My older sister, we're both very big personalities and we've always clashed a little bit. So at the beginning, she would like make fun of me a little bit. Like I remember when I had my first like modest bathing suit, I like came out and showed it off and my sister like made fun of it and we got in a fight. And then later, like a couple months later, I remember some jerk on Twitter was like telling me that I was oppressed because he watched Unorthodox, so he knew my life. And she like started defending me and she was like, you don't know what you're talking about. She can make whatever decision she wants. And she like went on this whole thing and I like messaged her. I was like, wow, like, thank you. And so, I mean, it was probably very weird for her because we're on very different paths, but she's become like very supportive. Thank God.
But they're all still in America. You're the only one in Israel.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm hoping they're gonna move.
It reminds me of a story of somebody I know fairly well, and he was engaged to a girl, and she was the granddaughter of a religious rabbi, though her parents kept absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. And he was religious anyway, the boy. And when the parents heard that she was marrying him, they wanted nothing to do with her or nothing to do with the marriage because she was marrying somebody more religious. In a way, they probably would have been happier had she married out. Years later, they did marry. Years later, her father apologized and said, I was wrong. and actually admit it. And it happens very often. But I was surprised at what you said about how much anti-Semitism there was in California. I spent a lot of time in Middle America, and I see how positive people are towards the Jews.
For sure.
And Israel.
I think also people think, Los Angeles has a lot of Jews. It's just the specific suburb doesn't. It's very white, and it's very white nationalist a little bit. And so it's a little bit different, but now, you see in Los Angeles, like, people were waving Palestinian flags outside of the LA Holocaust Museum. So it's a different type of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism exists as very different but very similar beasts on the right and on the left. We were talking a little bit before about politics. I do not subscribe to either side of the political spectrum. I think that both, specifically in American politics, and we can talk about politics. I don't like talking about politics in Israel, it's a whole thing, but specifically American politics, it's both sides have shown themselves to not be safe for Jewish people. And so I very much believe in being an independent, and while I'll whatever, when it's time to register to vote, that's like a whole game, but I see myself as independent of party because I don't like them.
But I think what's come out is not the fact that there is more anti-Semitism out there. I think there's just as much as there ever was. The difference is people feel comfortable in coming out and being abusive to Jews and showing their anti-Semitism.
Now they have a cover for it, because anti-Semitism, that's not woke, that's not politically correct, but anti-Zionism, that's good. That means that you are anti-racist. That means you are all these incredible things. So they think that denying us our indigenous liberation and our right to exist in our homeland isn't against our existence, when it very clearly is, because they're uninformed. And really, people, I think, were looking for a way to hate Jews. They just didn't know that they were looking for a way to hate Jews. And when it presented itself in a politically correct way, they grabbed onto it as soon as they possibly could.
I mean, they don't have the same, it's not the care and concern for the children. 2,300 children have been murdered in Yemen, 12,500 children out of 500,000 people dead in Syria. A few people have died, and yes, death is bad, and people who die, and for the family,
it's not even just,
but it's not who's dying, it's about who's doing the killing.
Let's talk about Palestinians in Arab countries. Let's talk about how they're treated in Lebanon and how they're treated in Jordan. But no, we can't talk about that, because then we can't blame the Jews for that. So we don't care about those Palestinians. We don't care that they're still in refugee camps and they won't be absorbed by those countries, and they are treated like garbage and second-class citizens. We don't care, because we don't care about Palestinians. We care about hating Jews.
Yeah.
That is made completely clear when these people are apologetic of Hamas, who uses Palestinians as human shields and who kills them, who doesn't care about them.
But don't you think now in America, which does really concern me, and that is the percentage of Jews that are, they're not anti-Semitic, but they're anti-Zionist.
I think they are anti-Semitic.
And you look at the Democrats and the other lot,
I think it's internalized anti-Semitism. I think that it is a type of anti-Semitism, just like a woman, during the suffragette movement, there were many, many women who said, we don't need to vote, shut up and go home. And that's sexist. There are Black people who oppose, Black liberation. There are people from every single, minority group. You have, Rudy actually makes this analogy that when you see a woman in an abusive relationship, there are three responses. So she can either stand up and fight back in whatever way that is, whether like getting a divorce, actually physically fighting back, leaving, whatever. The second is making excuses. Like he's just having a bad day. He's not usually like this. And the third is blaming yourself for it. So, I shouldn't have gotten angry. I shouldn't have done this thing. I shouldn't have done that. And so you see, there is, unfortunately, in every minority group, when minority groups begin fighting for their liberation, within each one, you see there's a portion of them who will blame themselves for their own oppression. That's very sad. And we should hope to help them break out of that mindset. But it is a form of anti-Semitism, and it is very sad. I want to say that it is a very small minority. They're very loud, but well over, I think it's over 95% of Jews are Zionists in some capacity. That doesn't necessarily mean supporting the Israeli government. That doesn't necessarily mean supporting political Zionism. I myself am not a huge fan of Theodor Herzl, which people, tend to be shocked by, but like, I'm religious. I don't think that this should have been, established in the secular way that it was. I'm thankful that it's here, and I'm going to say thank you to Hashem. I'm going to sing Hallel on, Matzmaut, whatever. But most Jews by far believe that Jews have a right to live here. They just don't know how to feel given the conflict.
It's very good. I saw a clip of yours. I don't want to get too political, but I thought you were incredible. And this was about NBC. And you really tore them to pieces, didn't you?
With the nurses episode, correct?
Well, you basically said they were anti-Semitic.
Yeah. I think with a lot of I think it's also frustrating as, someone who comes from the world of theater. I was a playwright and an actress. I still am a playwright and an actress. I don't think that's a was thing. I think I'm changing my craft to fit who I am now. Just as I would, even if I didn't become religious, it's always like a morphing thing. But as someone who is very into, creating content, creating media into film and television, into theater, and also being an Orthodox Jew, not seeing myself represented is very frustrating. And anytime I am being represented, it's in a negative way. So you take something like Unorthodox, which is a beautifully done miniseries about a story that should be told because abuse is bad and we should call it out when it happens. However, abuse happens in every single community. It's not specific to the ultra-Orthodox community of Williamsburg. And to see that being taken in a way of the only good thing to come out of, the only good path for an ultra-Orthodox Jew is to embrace secularism, which was the theme of that miniseries. And it's very palatable to a secular audience because that's what they want to see, especially nowadays. We live in a very atheist and Christian society at the same time. People want to be told God doesn't matter. So when they see this woman, leaving to freedom of being a secular person, I'm not judging the person who it's based off of, because I can't imagine going through that abuse because I didn't go through it. But it's frustrating that, people are taking this mini series and telling me how to live my life, because specifically in response to Unorthodox, I have gotten so many unsolicited messages from strangers telling me I'm oppressed. They're going to make me shave my head, which, like, I'm not Satmar, but like, even if you are, like, a lot of them are totally fine with it. And if they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it. And that, men are superior to me, that I am just that I just exist to make babies, which, like, no, it's frustrating. Then when you see something like nurses, which could have, taken this time to talk about, pikuach nefesh laws, but instead use like Hasidic Jews to make sexist and racist comments, completely contradictory to halacha. It's frustrating, because if you asked one Orthodox Jew, they'd tell you that's stupid and no one would say that. And if they did, they'd be wrong according to Judaism. So yeah, I guess it just comes from a lot of, anger from wanting to be a part of this world of like making content, making media, and also just feeling like it has rejected me entirely.
In America, the rate of intermarriage is somewhere in the region of about 60%. In the UK, it's around 22%. We tend to to follow. I know that when people first moved to America or were moving there in the early 20th century, for them, even though they were Jewish and having come from Europe or wherever, what they wanted to be was American first and Jewish second. Did you see a lot of that amongst Jews when you were growing up?
I mean, in my community, at my school, I was always the most Jewish person there. And I wasn't, again, I didn't grow up religious. For them, for a lot of people in my community, it was very much an afterthought. But then, there were times where I'd go to, USY or Camp Ramah, and Judaism was very much a part of who we were. It was just a different type of Judaism. Conservative Judaism is different from like what Judaism is. It has like its different, things, but it was always, Torah was a huge part of it. We davened every single day. We would read from the Torah. When we got older, we would read 3 times a week from the Torah, like, you're supposed to in shul. And I remember when I was there, it was like always surrounding us, whether it was, the culture of it or the history of it. Even, when I was there and I wasn't religious, it was still a huge part of it. So I guess when I was back in public school, those Jews, it seemed very much like an afterthought for them. It was, and even for me too, unfortunately, I got, I kind of look back and I cringe a little bit, because in high school, I was excited to celebrate Christmas. And now anytime anyone mentions Christmas, I have to go on like a 5-minute rant about how disgusting Christmas is and how its entire history is just murdering Jews and raping women, and it shouldn't exist, and it's a disgusting holiday. And if you want to learn more, Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman has an incredible shiur called The Real History of Xmas and New Year's. You should look it up. It's on simpletoremember.com. I tell everyone to watch it because it just completely changes your outlook. But there's definitely a pressure, especially when you're a kid and you're growing up around people who aren't like you, and you're the odd man out. You're already dealing with so many things of like wanting to fit in. Growing up is very difficult. Going through puberty is very difficult. And I'm a weird kid naturally. I'm always, I'm a huge nerd, and thank God that's helped me like in my Torah studies. Now I want to learn all the little details, and it's really helped me a lot with that. But I was weird enough. I don't want to be weird for another reason. So if I can blend in this way, like why wouldn't I do that, But they say, about the Jews before the Holocaust, they were trying to be more German than the Germans. It's this type of overcompensation, because deep down, I'm not like them. And that's not a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing that they are who they are. I'm not saying this to put anyone down. I'm saying we are our own people. We have our own mission. We have this unique thing about us. And deep down, we know we are unique. We know we have this mission. And so if we're going to try to blend in, there's this definite push towards overcompensation.
The question is for people in the diaspora, living in Israel or live outside Israel? What would be your recommendation?
Not even a question. Live in Israel. Jews should not live in the diaspora. I really believe this. People think I'm a little crazy because like this is something that I feel very, very strongly about. Jews are not meant to live in the diaspora. Come home.
I thought you might say that.
What happens if your husband wants to go away somewhere?
If someone wants to go, there is literally no climate that you can't have in Israel. Israel is everything. You can go to the beach, you can go to the mountains, you can go to the desert, you can go to a zoo, you can go to, you can see history, you can see, there's nothing that you could want that isn't in Israel.
Yeah, no, that's true. Okay, we were talking before about your actressing in LA. In Israel now, the film business there has become huge. It's incredible. And the films that are coming out of there, and especially things like, which we've all watched, Shtiesel, all the Fowler people, Orthodox, and they're fantastic films. What I understand is that most of the actors are irreligious and also a bit left wing. Wouldn't you want to get involved there?
So I have not had the time, especially because we're only just now I think yesterday we finally lifted the need to wear masks inside. So we're like officially out of COVID. So coming here in the middle of COVID, it's been really difficult to find out what the acting scene looks like here. I know that there are already a lot of, I don't know, going into a secular acting world, I think it's very different from where I am now. I still want to keep up with theater. I think theater is everything to me. It's always been my whole life. It's always been my direction. And I do think I'm using it for what I'm doing now. I'm still writing scripts and I'm still performing, even right now in front of you guys. This is just more improv. But I think that for what I want to do, it's definitely going to be something that I'm going to have to invent. I'm really excited to start looking into the women's theaters here. I know there are like religious acting scenes, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they're like, and seeing how I can bring myself to them and, I don't know, make my own space in the acting world here, I guess.
Well, it's 9 o'clock, so I think we're more or less there. Have you got anything else that you want to discuss?
Come to Israel. Don't wait.
Have you ever been to London?
I went once. I've always been a huge history geek. When I was in middle school, I was obsessed with English history. Because I didn't know that my people had such a cool history, because Jewish history is so much cooler, like no offense. But so we went to London. I remember at the Tower of London, I wouldn't let the tour guide get in a word. Anytime he'd bring something up, I'd finish his sentences and answer everything. So yeah, it's beautiful. Okay. It's no Israel.
It is.
We've not had an American in England who doesn't have the last word. Even your president has managed it recently.
Okay, David, over to you.
Well, if are we at the end? So
I can't.
It's 11 o'clock for you. I know you're.
Wait a minute. We've got a hand waving there. Helen really? Berkman. Helen, can you demute yourself?
I can ask her to unmute if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Helen Berkman. I'm in Israel at the moment, and my daughter-in-law, Noga Berkman, wants to ask a question.
Hi. Like your talk was really interesting, and I'm always saying that the only thing we have here in Israel is a very, very bad PR. Can you tell us like one example of the thing you're doing in order to give us good PR?
Okay. First off, I think that our PR doesn't matter. Really, I think that it's not, what I'm doing is less about convincing non-Jews and more about empowering Jews to feel more comfortable in who they are. But I think that now with, the social media activists, it's a lot about speaking in the language of activism. It's a lot about talking in the language of primarily the left, talking about indigenous rights, talking about, how Arab colonialism has affected us, talking in terms of oppression, in terms of, it's about speaking in their language. We can talk about, cherry tomatoes and ways all we want, but ultimately people are interested in what's actually going on in the conflict. And people now, human rights is kind of at the apex of what is good in our society. It's definitely changed over the years, and you'll see that Jews often are made to represent the exact opposite of what the apex is. So, when Christianity was the apex, Jews were, the threat to salvation. When white racial purity was the apex, Jews were the people who are dirtying up the white race. So we need to see what people are valuing, how they're speaking, and then speak to them in their own language. And I think that that's kind of the most effective way to do it. If you say that, it's kind of the difference between saying, Israel has pride parades every summer, and saying, if you care about LGBTQ plus Palestinians, you will be against Hamas and you will be against the Palestinian Authority because they're oppressing them. So kind of it's about kind of switching the narrative and seeing what they value and then kind of filling in how Israel fits what they value. If that makes sense.
Where are you in Israel? The Bertmans, I meant.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you in Israel, Helen? Oh, you muted yourself.
Here.
No, it's still muted. No. Can't hear you. No. Okay, David Lando, we can't hear you either. You're muted. Everyone's muted. David?
You have to ask them to unmute.
Yeah.
I don't think they can unmute on their side.
No. David,
Brown.
you've got to unmute. Hello? He's talking away there. We can't hear you.
I think try making him the host and then he can unmute himself.
No,
I don't think people can unmute themselves right now on their own.
Hold on. Oh,
Right.
hold on.
You're a host, David, so you have to unmute people.
You didn't tell me that. I didn't know it was so important. Okay. Okay. Anybody else got any questions? No?
I'll take that as a no.
No. Okay, David, over to you. You must be tired, Hila.
It's 11 o'clock. She's young. She's got another 6 hours to go.
Yeah, that's true.
I remember being young. It's a while ago. Not really, no. Hila, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you here from 2,500 miles away, and for most of the time you were very clear. We just lost you for bits and pieces, but it was an absolute pleasure having you here with us, and I wish you continued success with everything you do in Israel and throughout your life, with your acting, with whatever path you choose in your life. I wish you great success with everything, and I wish you that you should always be safe, as your family, as in fact Kol Yisrael. So everybody should be safe and well. If I could just say for everybody who's here at the moment, next week we have Jonathan Ornstein with us, who is the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Center of Krakow in Poland, an organization devoted to rebuilding Jewish life in Krakow. They boast over 750 Jewish members and welcome 10,000 visitors a month. I'm not sure that number is correct over the last 12 months, though. They've probably been welcoming 3.5 people because of the pandemic, but hopefully they'll get back to the 10,000. But do join us. That should be very interesting. The rebirth of the Jewish life in Poland. Should be very interesting. Again, thank you, Hila, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was very nice talking to you all. Good night.
And you as well. Good night, and thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being here this evening.